Hello everyone. Today I wanted to tell you about the events that took place in 2016 in Wales, United Kingdom. I invite you to listen to the story of Georgina Symonds and Peter Morgan. Georgina always enjoyed the interest of men. Even when she was still going to school, boys paid attention to her. No wonder, Georgina was a pretty and, on top of that, feisty girl. However, despite the fact that there were many boys around her interested in her, she already as a teenager got involved with Pete Deem, who was 6 years older than her. They had already been together for a long time when, at 19, Georgina learned that they were going to become parents. This information made Georgina decide to move in with Pete and his mother in Newport, and when their baby girl came into the world, they began to form a small family. They both adored their child. Georgina loved Pete very much, but she was still very young and did not intend to devote herself only to her family. She still wanted to hang out with her friends or go out to parties, just to live the life she had before her daughter was born. And here, the difference in age between Georgina and her partner was apparent. While she was bursting with energy and had the urge to do something all the time, Pete was happy to spend time at home after work. Therefore, it usually ended with Georgina leaving home alone, leaving her partner with their daughter. Once they moved out of Pete's family home and lived on their own, they led a life like many families. Pete worked in an auto repair shop as a mechanic, while Georgina spent 8 hours as a telemarketer. However, this was not the job of her dreams. It seemed too monotonous for her. The young woman constantly wanted something more out of life and quickly looked for additional work. In the evenings after working hours, she could be seen performing in a nightclub. But even this job brought her too little excitement and money. Therefore, Georgina started working as an escort. This job transformed her life. She began to spend time in the company of rich men and earned more and more. Appearance was always important to her as well. She paid a lot of attention to what she wore or how she looked. And now, she finally had money to invest in herself. She could buy expensive clothes or spend it on various beauty treatments. Pete wasn't too happy with what his partner was doing, but he thought it was temporary, so he pretended nothing was happening. And Georgina kept seeing different men all the time. And in 2012, she met another one, 50-year-old Peter Morgan. Georgina was much younger than him at the time, as she was 21, but Peter was a millionaire with enough money to pay for her services. He came from a rather wealthy family. His father owned a company that was engaged in constructing various types of farm buildings. In the company's best period, 120 people worked there, including Peter, who worked in his father's company for many years. In 1992, he married a woman he had met 8 years earlier, and from this relationship, their 2 daughters were born. The man then came to the conclusion that it was about time to start working on his own. It was time to stop working for his father. He then set up his own business, which operated in the same market as his father's company, with the difference that Peter's enterprise was engaged in the production of prefab chicken huts. Over time, it turned out that the business worked very well and brought them a really high income. Peter never complained about lack of money in his life. Even as a child, he always got what he wanted, but his new business made him a millionaire. However, the money didn't change him, perhaps because he was used to wealth from an early age. In any case, he led a quiet family life, all the while being faithful to his wife. In the late 2000s, Peter and his wife Helen decided to sell the company. They already had ideas about what they would do with the money gained from the sale. They wanted to start investing in the real estate market and get into the business of renovating old buildings, as well as buying typical residential houses. The couple received many millions of pounds for selling their business, which was prospering very well all the time. And soon the money was used to buy a mill, a 13th century castle, and many other properties in the area. This was another of Peter's successful businesses that brought him quite a large income. However, at the same time, the work kept the man stressed all the time, which took a toll on his health. He began to suffer from alopecia and realized that he needed to change something in his life. Therefore, he and Helen made the decision to retire from the market, at least for a while. They were still quite young, but they were in possession of enough money that they could afford to take a break from work. Peter was in his 40s at the time and was starting to feel a bit of a midlife crisis. And since he could afford it, he started buying himself toys, such as a motorcycle. But it didn't stop there. A motorcycle could have been bought by anyone, but Peter, as a millionaire, had to have something better. Therefore, he bought himself sports cars, but he also owned a helicopter, a tank, or an American fire truck. His behavior then began to change, especially after 2003, when he and his friends went to Amsterdam for a few days. It was there that he first used the services of a woman practicing the world's oldest profession. However, this didn't mean that Peter started spending all his money on the company of beautiful young women. After this first incident, he remained faithful to his wife for many years until 2011, when one of his friends showed him an app that allows you to order a lady for company while sitting at home. It was then that Peter began to cheat on his wife more and more often. He usually did it once a month each time, making sure he chose a different woman, until he came across Georgina Symonds. She worked at the same agency as the other women, but from the very beginning she made a great impression on Peter. Even after the first meeting, he knew that the next meeting would also be with her. He also knew that he would not wait as long as a month to see her again, so he started meeting Georgina once a week. And with each meeting, Peter became more and more involved in this acquaintance. He felt as if they were a pair of lovers, although in fact, it was the most ordinary service for which Georgina received money. And she approached it that way herself. Peter was her client, like many others. Thanks to him, she was able to earn money that she could use to fulfill her and her family's dreams. Peter, however, did not seem to see it that way. Each week he paid her £150 an hour, which allowed him to spend time with a woman he was fascinated by. In addition, he showered her with all sorts of gifts, paid for stays at luxurious hotels and spas, or bought her a car. He had no intention of saving money on her. Peter became more and more involved in his relation with Georgina. He also did everything to make himself look better. There was a difference of more than 20 years between him and Georgina, and he began to make an effort to make the difference as inconspicuous as possible. He lost a few pounds, took care of his teeth, and began to dress completely differently. He was enamored of his mistress to the point that dating her once a week was no longer enough for him. Once, when his wife left home, Peter immediately offered Georgina to spend the whole night with him, for which she was to receive £1,000. He felt so comfortable in her company. She became more important to him than his wife, because after all, he was still married all this time, and he did everything he could to prevent his wife from finding out anything. And Helen lived in ignorance until 2013, when she learned on Valentine's Day that her husband had bought a bouquet of flowers. Since she was not the one who received it that day, she began to suspect that Peter was having an affair. However, she had no evidence at the time. She decided to discuss the matter with her husband only 2 years later in 2015. Peter had no intention of lying to her. He admitted everything, and that was the end of their marriage. He was finally able to officially date Georgina. They no longer had to hide. So Peter proposed a new arrangement to her. Since he was jealous of her other clients all the time, he came up with the idea that maybe she would agree to give up other men and meet only with him. He offered her a salary of about £10,000 a month and the opportunity to live in a house next to the castle he owned. This proposal was tempting. She would not have to meet other men and would still earn money that satisfied her. She also realized that she could still count on numerous gifts from Peter, and in August, she moved into this house. The partner with whom she had a child, whom she called Poor Pete, was not too thrilled about the decision. He knew exactly what his beloved was up to, but he didn't like it from the start. They had seemingly agreed that their relationship would be open, giving each other permission to meet other people. However, Pete was not thrilled with the situation. He definitely preferred Georgina to have another job and live with him. However, he realized that he had no chance to compete with Peter Morgan, who has a lot more money than him and who is able to provide Georgina with a life on a completely different level. Apparently, Georgina didn't care much for his opinion and moved out of the house with their daughter. Her decision led to the end of her relationship with Pete. After Georgina moved into the house of a rich sponsor, it seemed that she could no longer lack anything to be happy. She lived for free in a large house. Peter showered her with gifts all the time, bought her a new BMW, paid for her plastic surgery or horseback riding lessons, take her and her daughter on vacations abroad. He simply fulfilled her every whim. In addition, she received money from him every month. The amount was not always the same, but Georgina usually received between £7,000 and £10,000. As for the financial issue, she did not lack anything, but she was not happy living in the house. She treated her relationship with Peter completely professionally all the time. He supported her financially, but for that, Georgina had to be ready at his every call. And this began to bother her, because when she previously worked with different clients, she could, for example, take a break from work, not work for a day or a few days. Living in Peter's house, it looked like she was working 7 days a week, 24 hours a day. In addition, she missed seeing her friends and didn't want to invite them to the house where she lived. It was not her home. Living there was part of the agreement between her and Peter. Therefore, she felt that it was inappropriate for her to invite her friends there. The whole situation began to weigh her down more and more. She was taking it worse and worse mentally. She supposedly had everything, but in fact, she had nothing. Her mental state deteriorated significantly when her former partner Pete went missing in November 2015. They were no longer a couple at the time, but since he was the father of her child, they continued to keep in touch. And when he went missing, he could not be found for 2 days, only after which time a tragic discovery was made. He was found in the woods, where he had taken his own life. No one close to him, including Georgina, realized that all that had happened in their relationship had affected his mental health very badly. Pete took it hard to the point where he began to fall into depressive states. Shortly before he disappeared, there was a rather serious argument between him and Georgina, and that was the last time she saw him. Pete was the second person Georgina lost that year, as her dad had died earlier in the spring. The two closest people left this world in such short space of time, and it was a huge blow to Georgina. She didn't quite know how she was supposed to cope, and increasingly began to turn to alcohol and other stimulants. Peter noticed that she was taking what had happened to her very badly. He tried to help her as much as he could. He cared deeply that she was happy, and he could not watch her drown her sorrows in ever-increasing amounts of alcohol. However, her behavior toward him changed completely. Although she was still aware of the agreement that existed between them, she did not treat him very well. She was very abrasive towards him and increasingly shouted at him. This situation continued into January 2016, when the 25-year-old was hospitalized. On that day, she overdosed on drugs, and Peter drove her to the hospital. While she was there, he asked her to tell the doctor about her addiction. He hoped that when she told about her problem, she would get the help she needed. However, the opposite happened. The doctors became concerned about her condition, knowing that she was raising her daughter. They reported the case to social services. Georgina realized that they could take the child away from her if she didn't get her life in order. She believed it was Peter's fault. After all, he was the one who persuaded her to tell the doctors everything. It was his idea, and now she will suffer the consequences. From that moment on, the relationship between her and Peter deteriorated considerably. Georgina realized that she had to do everything to free herself from him. She no longer wanted to live by his side, but she had become accustomed to the standard of living he provided her. Therefore, she knew that she had to play it right, so that Peter would at least leave her the house where she lived with her daughter. However, he couldn't do that even if he wanted to, because half of the house belonged to his ex-wife. The man seemed not to notice that Georgina was trying to take advantage of him. It seemed to him that at this difficult moment for her, she needed him more than ever. That's why he didn't leave her or kick her out of his house, despite the fact that he began to suspect that after Pete's death, Georgina started seeing an old friend. However, he wasn't sure about this, so he came up with the idea to install wiretaps in the house where she lived. He bought a device that he plugged into one of the electrical outlets in the house. The device could be fitted with a SIM card, the same one found in cell phones, and whenever he wanted to listen to what was going on at home, he simply had to call the number. Apparently, he did this so that he could monitor whether Georgina was overdoing it with alcohol and stimulants. He wanted her to come out of it so that everything would be as before. He didn't want her daughter to be taken away from her. And thanks to the device, he had the ability to control her. But actually, eavesdropping on Georgina became his obsession. He listened to what was going on in her house several times a day, and could listen to one conversation for up to 2 hours. But eavesdropping was not fruitless. During the many hours he spent listening to what the woman was saying, mostly on the phone talking to friends, he learned that she was lying to him, and not just on one point. Peter learned that social services had determined some time ago that there was nothing wrong with Georgina's daughter, that her mother was taking good care of her, and that there was no need for them to continue to control the family. Meanwhile, Peter had been living in the belief all along that Georgina could lose her daughter at any moment, as she told him that she was still under the watchful eye of social services, and that no decision had yet been made. She manipulated him in this way. She knew that with this strategy, she was managing to arouse his pity and thus extort even more from him. Thanks to the wiretap, Peter also learned that Georgina intends to return to her previous style of work. She no longer wants to work exclusively for one man. As soon as it can be arranged that Peter will rewrite the house she lives in to her, she intends to immediately break the contract that was between them and find a few more clients, preferably in London, because even more money can be made there. She knew very well how to get Peter to rewrite the house to her. It was to convince him to do so with a recording in her possession. Sometime earlier, Peter had decided to spend the night in the company of Georgina and another woman. He invited them both to his house while his wife was away. The women dressed in things belonging to Helen, and eventually, they all ended up in bed. Georgina, in secret from Peter of course, recorded the whole thing and thought it would now be her ace up her sleeve. If Peter did not agree to rewrite the house, she would make the recording available to his wife, children, and the entire family. Peter had no intention of letting that happen. He didn't want anyone, especially his daughters, to see the video. On January 12, 2016, around 9:30 in the morning, Peter went to meet Georgina. He wanted to settle the matter of the recording. When he arrived there, Georgina was on the phone with her friend. She arranged to meet her at 4 p.m. the same day. When she finished talking, Peter immediately told her what was the purpose of his visit. He offered to give Georgina the house she was living in, and to be added to Peter's life insurance policy, and receive £1 million in the event of his death. The only thing he wanted in return was all copies of the recording. However, Georgina did not agree. Once again, she began accusing Peter that social services might take her daughter away because of him. Peter, however, was well aware that this was not true. Social services were no longer interested in Georgina and her child. He heard exactly how she told her friend about it. He realized then that he would not get anything settled with her this way. Therefore, he grabbed the cord he had tied around his wrist, wrapped it around Georgina's neck, and tightened it. He hoped that she would be scared enough to change her mind, that she would ask him to spare her life, that she might apologize to him and promise not to use the video. But none of these things happened, and Peter knew that it had all gone too far. He couldn't let Georgina have one more reason to blackmail him, which is why he didn't stop. The woman still managed to tell Peter that he would pay for what he had just done, but he tightened the cord further until she stopped moving. That same day after 3 p.m., Georgina's 5-year-old daughter waited for her mother to pick her up from school. She was never late, but on that day, she didn't show up at all. When Georgina's family was notified, they immediately started looking for her. Also concerned was her friend, with whom she was supposed to meet that day, because Georgina did not show up at the agreed place. Everyone tried to determine where she might be. However, she was not at home, nor did she answer the phone. They thought that maybe Peter would know anything about her whereabouts, but the man did not know where she might be. Seeing no other way out, they informed the police about her disappearance around 8 p.m. Since Peter was the person she was seeing, he was interrogated, but testified that he had no idea where she might be. Georgina disappeared without leaving any message. Police officers checked the activity of her cell phone, whether it was on and where she had logged on recently. And it was determined that on January 12th at around 12 o'clock, the phone must have been on a farm belonging to Peter's ex-wife. When asked if he knew where the phone could be, he denied it, but thought at the time that maybe Georgina wanted to talk to his ex-wife there that day, which is why it was near her house. There was only one problem. Helen was not at home at the time, as she was on vacation that day. When the policeman informed him of this, Peter recalled that he had taken Georgina's phone so that she couldn't buy any stimulants for herself, and hid it in his car located on the farm. And indeed, Georgina's phone was found in one of Peter's cars, which was parked near his ex-wife's house. However, the whole situation made investigators even more suspicious. While everyone was busy looking for Georgina, he himself called her phone number several times, and not once did he recall that he had previously taken the phone from her. All this was suspicious enough that the man was questioned again, and finally in the morning, he couldn't stand the pressure and confessed to everything. He told investigators that he was the one who killed her and hid her body in a workshop located next to his ex-wife's house, and even gave them the keys to that workshop. The investigators would have figured it out sooner or later anyway, because Peter forgot about something very important. There were several cameras installed near his ex-wife's house, and one of them was aimed at this very garage. Later, investigators checked the footage, and it showed Peter driving his car up there around 12 o'clock, and from the trunk took out a large black bag, which he carried inside. Police officers already knew that the bag contained Georgina's body. During the interrogation, Peter also admitted why he did it. He loved Georgina very much and was able to do anything for her. For her, he gave up his marriage, which lasted 22 years. He gave up half of an estate worth more than £20 million, which he had to give to his wife. Nothing mattered as much as Georgina. He loved her and thought she reciprocated his affection. He felt that they were getting along very well. And that was until mid-November, when Georgina's former partner took his own life. Things began to deteriorate between them, and when suspecting her of infidelity, he set up a wiretap in her home. He learned things that shocked him. He was devastated when he learned that Georgina was planning to marry another man, and that she is only with him to get as much money out of him as possible. He sacrificed so much for her, and Georgina was so ungrateful. He loved her, and she clearly didn't even like him. However, when the trial began a year later, Peter changed his testimony a bit. He admitted that he was the one who took Georgina's life. However, he was unaware of what he was doing. He was diagnosed with an autism spectrum, specifically Asperger's syndrome, and this made him unable to make rational decisions in stressful situations. However, throughout his life, he ran various companies in which he often had to make decisions while under stress, and never once did his illness negatively affect his life. Therefore, this explanation was rejected. Peter's defense tried to mitigate his punishment by explaining that the murder occurred in an act of affection. Peter learned that his mistress had been lying to him for a long time and that she was about to blackmail him, except that in his phone was found a list of things Peter had done the day before the murder. The list included string, plastic bags, gloves, and several more items that he needed on January 12th. If the crime had been committed in an act of affection, such a list should not exist. The jury did not believe any of these versions, and Peter Morgan was sentenced to life imprisonment. He will spend a minimum of 25 years in prison. Thank you for listening until the end. If you like my channel and would like to support my work, please give like and subscribe. Goodbye for now, and stay safe.